Good afternoon, and welcome to our afternoon commentary and analysis on the Southern Baptist Convention. This would be a reflection on the Wednesday morning session. That session actually is still trying to wrap up. Hopefully before too long. They're already past time by about a half hour, and they have postponed the final resolutions report. Actually, the resolutions committee agreed to condense that all into their third report, which will be happening later in the day today. So let's give you a quick highlight. We do have some others that have anticipated joining and coming on board. So if they're able to get in, part of our problem with some of our guests on this analysis and commentary that we're hosting is many of them are at the convention. So if you have been to the convention when there have been 10, 12, 14,000 people, trying to, one, get out of the room to a quiet place is very difficult. And two, if it keeps running excessively long as it's doing, an additional problem, obviously, as you can imagine. So let me do a run through, and we're going to highlight some of the things that have happened already today. Let me just kind of take it through the schedule just a little bit as we walk through it. The morning obviously opened with the worship, and we had several entity reports. Nothing really significant coming from Women's Missionary Union. I mean, good reports, but nothing controversial or debatable at that point. And then the Guidestone financial report. The only thing, one of the questions for Guidestone has been just the question of affordable health care, particularly for smaller churches. Having been in some of those meetings when I know that Guidestone has been reporting, they have said how difficult it is in that market. It's a very competitive market. There are lots of people in that space with healthcare. And when you have just one individual that's going to be on a healthcare plan, the costs are just exorbitant. But anyway, that was one of the questions that was brought up. Just the issue of being able to have affordable health care for smaller churches at that point. Then the ERLC came, and Brett Leatherwood did that report. He told a very compelling story, put himself very much in a vulnerable position in stating that his kids were at the Covenant school in Tennessee there when that shooting happened outside of Nashville, and that they were just really, really concerned about everything that had happened there. And he set that up just talking about how important life is, and stating that life really is precious, and that really brought that home to he and his family and his kids that were there. Very, very difficult. One of our problems that we consistently have at our convention meetings is the issue of having enough time for debate, business. This is the only business session the messengers have in a year. So I remember as a younger pastor, we would have literally 3.5-day convention, and you would start, on the Monday, would have the pastors conference would end on Monday morning. The convention would start on Monday evening a lot of times, and then wouldn't be finished up till Thursday. And then they backed it up to finish on Wednesday night. And now we're down to just the 4 sessions when we have on 2 days. So we've narrowed the time, and part of that's been because just people would start taking off after, a big vote, for instance, a presidential vote or something of that sort, and then it would just evacuate the building, basically. But one of the issues that keeps coming up is the lack of time for being able to ask questions. ERLC always is kind of a lightning rod, I guess you could say. They're dealing with very political issues a lot of times, with the issue of Roe v. Wade being overturned and everything related to the abortion issue now. They're right in the middle of all that, and where people stand and trying to do well. They did report that they were their next placement for their Psalm, I think it's, I forgot, Psalm 139 That's not right, but it's a Psalm something ministry, which is basically a placement of equipment into pregnancy centers, that some of their next placements are going to happen right there in the Louisiana area in partnership with that state convention in Louisiana and one of the associations there. So that's good news. And that's one of the real pluses that we're doing as a convention. But anyway, all that to say, they only got one question, and in the time that was allowed for them in their presentation and questions. And part of the reason for that was once the one question was asked, his response took so much time. It's a very long response, and the messengers were lining up. There were several places with people at microphones wanting to ask additional questions, but the time was called. And so there wasn't much time to be able to interact. Actually, Twitter has kind of blown up this morning because of this very thing multiple times, where there's only been able to be one, maybe two questions to be asked. Yesterday, the North American Mission Board only got two questions. And there's all kinds of issues around the North American Mission Board. And we got, of course, the kind of the whitewash view as far as, how, things are good. A couple of stabs at past NAM administrations with the NAM report yesterday is, he even played a video from Kevin Ezell, played a video from the very first convention. He made a report where he basically threw everybody before him under the bus. But anyway, after the ERLC report, then we came to several ballots. We had a report actually on the officers, one of the officers anyway, and that was the first vice president. And so as you can see here on the graphic, Jay Adkins won that pretty much overwhelmingly with 63.27%. Then the question came up in regard to the churches that the EC had disfellowshipped. And so let's just move right into that, and I'll show you these graphics as well. Each of them were dealt with individually, had to be voted on individually. So the election results, the vote to sustain the EC action, which was to disfellowship Fern Creek Baptist. At this convention time, Fern Creek Baptist is not Southern Baptist because they have been disfellowshipped. So this was an appeal for them to stay, reject what the EC recommendation had been to disfellowship them. And as you can see, it was an overwhelming 91.85% for that. The second church that was considered that had appealed was a church by the name of Freedom Church. And this church, there were different issues. This was not a woman in ministry kind of situation as far as pastoral role. This was a long history of abuse. That had been some time back, actually, and a lot of kind of odd things in their presentation and the counter presentation from that committee responding to their appeal. So as you can see, the messengers were swayed very strongly to stay with the EC action at 94.6%. And then the one that's gotten all the news and is continuing to get all the news is Saddleback Church. And as you can see, the percentages aren't quite as overwhelming as the other two. Of course, there was quite a media campaign set out by Rick Warren and Saddleback Church to try to overwhelm and get the vote to move their way. But the yes vote was 0.46% in favor of supporting the EC action, which was to disfellowship the church at that point. So as you can see, that is one of those things that the convention pretty well took a solid stand on at that point moving forward. And so not a whole lot more can be said. Now, they are going to come back to discussing that. I'll tell you about that a little bit more in just a minute. But let's keep moving forward. Todd, Unzinger, somebody from North Carolina, help me. Anyway, whatever that is, he is the executive director of North Carolina. And Todd, I'm really sorry. I know we've never met, but I'm really sorry for messing up your name so bad. But anyway, he came gave basically his personal testimony about how he came to Christ and how Baptists had played such a critical role in his coming to know Christ. Really, really a powerful message. As some on the internet were saying, a lot of heat was coming with his message, but hit some really solid things. For the most part, a very positive message. Trying to uplift Baptists, be proud of who you are, stand behind who you are, don't get caught in the rut. You could say that weren't his words, that's my word, but just don't get caught in the rut of negativism and some of those kind of things. He really did a good job with that at that point. The Order of Business Committee came and announced that they were going to be delaying the Abuse Task Force report, which it was moved from yesterday evening up till this morning. And so they put it off till the end of the session. And I'll tell you about that a little bit more in just a minute. Then they went through the deposition of, all the motions, the ones that have been referred and ones that were considered not in order. A number of those people a lot of times get kind of bent out of shape at the convention over the deposition of their motion as they're presented, but oftentimes they're not written in proper form. A lot of times they put restrictions in them. One of them yesterday that was thrown out, for instance, had a time restriction that was impossible to meet. It was just not, physically impossible. It couldn't be met in the way it was written. So it automatically was ruled out of order. So there were a number of those that were ruled out of order as well. And then some that were referred motions. I can highlight just a little bit. I tried to jot down some of these as we went, but the referred motions, there were 3 motions referred to the IMB. There were 2 motions referred to the ERLC. The EC received 6 motions that were referred to them, including motions on the Constitution, financial practices, the convention being in Salt Lake City, a study working together in the Great Commission, 2028 SBC to be in Maui, Hawaii. And that got lots of cheers, particularly because the young woman that was presenting it yesterday, it took her about 5 times at the microphone before she got it at the right time that she could make the motion. But anyway, it was referred to the EC for consideration. And then there was one about to stop working with Guidepost Solutions, which is the firm that has been handling the abuse and put out the abuse report this last year. So some of the ones that were not in order, a NAM study to study the results since the GCR was put out. A funding of abuse was just, in short, it was not done properly. Lifeway provide textbooks, and then effectiveness of NAM and Southwestern Seminary were also ruled not in order at that point. Then we got to the previously scheduled business, and this is where we came into the abuse scheduled business. The abuse task force was placed very first here. Several things just to note. Marshall Blaylock, who is the chairman of the abuse reform implementation task force, he came and just obviously expressed gratitude to folks for being a part and allowing him to serve, but also the massive task of the committee. Got into some of the resources, and several other committee members came and talked about the resources. He did initially talk about one of the things that had just come to their attention this last week, and that was this situation that appeared about Daryl Stagg. Now, Daryl Stagg has been in ministry with Southern Baptist Work for a number of years. Daryl actually is a person that I have known over the years working in associational work. He is now in Louisiana, and as you can see, he was arrested on several counts of sexual abuse. There are a number of charges that are pending related to that. And so that was brought up, and he told that story about how this is the kind of thing that happens fairly frequently. There is no conviction at this point in this particular case. So the issue at this point is it's not going to be distributed in any kind of a database or website until there's actually a conviction at this point. But he used that as an illustration to say these kind of things are surfacing with quite a bit of frequency at that point. So then they introduced a toolbox and a website that is going to be usable for all churches. The ministry kind of check website that had been talked about, they weren't calling it that today, but tools and resources are going to be there to be able to be accessed by churches. The database, once it's fully filled, right now it has just fake names, sample names where they're testing it all out, taking it through kind of beta testing. But at the ultimate goal is that they will have that before too long, once all the names that they're taking have been vetted. And so he explained that being accused, which is one of the phrases that they've used in some of the language before, being credibly accused, that they're not just taking somebody making a phone call and saying, hey, pastor so-and-so or youth minister so-and-so, whatever, has been doing so-and-so. They want to take that information, but then it's going to go through a process of vetting, and ultimately it will be investigated before anything is put on this site to verify that this has actually happened. Interestingly, a church name is not going to be put on that. One of the messengers did bring up that when that initial list was brought out, that his church ended up on that list, and the pastor who was, or it was a youth minister, I think, that was connected, he had been arrested for sexual abuse. But the problem was, it wasn't that he had been arrested in any connection to the church. A local media source connected that and said he'd been using the church for grooming, but the church had nothing to do with it. He was actually arrested at the local school, and they had identified that's where most of the grooming and things had taken place at that point. But because their church had been connected with it, they had people who had come and visited and then done their research, just Googling, seeing what the reviews are, as people do these days, and came to find out they surfaced this report that the local media had connected to them. So they were saying, but we're not really connected with that, but they couldn't get rid of the stain, in other words. So Blaylock mentioned back to him, he told him, well, that's not going to happen anymore. One, we're not listing the church happened, so that's not going to be on there. It will only be that individual's name, and then exactly what the conviction was, and what the accusations were at that point. And they are going to go through kind of multiple levels. He said they had 4 different categories. I'll give you those 4 categories, but I missed the third one. He went through them pretty fast, but 4 categories for verification purposes. The first one is conviction. The second one, the first one is confession. Second one is conviction. The third one I missed, so I'm going to have to get it and put it in the minutes, or the notes of the video here. And then the fourth one is confirmation by an independent law firm. And so they will employ individual law firms to be able to go in and do an investigation to make sure that this accusation and or conviction meet all the legal standards of being credibly accused at that point. And that all happens before it's going to be put onto this website. Now, a little bit more about the tools. They gave a web address, but they gave it 2 different ways. So I'm not sure which one to give you. Initially, it was sbcprevention.com. sbcprevention.com, but then it came back later. Another committee member said sbcabuseprevention.com. So it's one of those 2 at that point. But anyway, this will be available to local churches. They can go in and do a database search. They reported that they were very happy with some of the meetings they have been having since the first of the year with state conventions, with associational leaders and others. And so many state conventions have already developed landing pages, other things where churches can get resources. Their resource, what they're calling a resource toolbox, is going to be continually expanded, but it has things in there to give churches the ability to be able to go ahead and get forms to use with volunteers to try to do the screening. It has there's kind of a 5-step protection process that they are going to detail that. They didn't give all the details today, but a kind of a 5-step process. And in that 5-step process, they're showing how churches are still pretty vulnerable if all they do is background checks on volunteers and staff. So there's going to need to be more than just the background check. And so they detail this in the toolbox and make that available. And there's downloadables in there for churches to be able to download forms, download documents, get other resources at that point. And so I think that's a really good move, a good move in the right direction at that point. And so they repeatedly said several times that they wanted SBC churches to be the safest place for people to go. And I can fully concur with that. We definitely would want to have folks to be in a safe zone when they're there. And then they were wrapping up at the end of the session here with the executive committee report. There was a recommendation from the executive committee to amend the bylaws. And they were trying to amend. It was one of the statements that they had recommended an amendment to change the name for the clarity of men being pastors. And so there was a lot of debate going on. Some of it was just wordsmithing, but some of it pro and con. Some of it was in favor of supporting the recommendation, saying that, in fact, one was fairly extreme to say that we should be saying to churches that they, can't use certain titles, or that they need to change titles and not use a woman who's doing women's ministry in a larger church, maybe, and they call her the women's pastor or something, that they should, change that name and not have that there and use a women's director or ministry leader or something of that sort. The big problem with that really is that the convention can't dictate to a church what a church does or labels. And if you get into the point of where the convention is saying, if you're going to be a Southern Baptist church, then you have to label all of your positions this way, then you're becoming a hierarchical type of organization. So in other organizations, denominations, not conventions like our convention of churches that fellowship together, but in denominations, they say, you'll be called a priest, you'll be called a bishop, whatever it is. And they tell you what the titles are for that. They don't, mess around and call them all kinds of things. Baptists, we're all independent thinkers and autonomous churches and organizations. So churches have chosen to call them all kinds of things. Some of that is relative to their context and how the people in that community would perceive the leadership of a church. And I get that, especially having seen that kind of thing as well. So a lot of that was going on. Those who were in favor of this amendment, or multiple amendments, actually it came into multiple amendments over this particular bylaw of recommendation 4. It just continued to kind of build on that. I tell you what I'll do also, let me put into the description of the video, I'll put in there the Wednesday bulletin, and that's the downloadable piece. You can go to the website and download that, and all of these recommendations are listed there. You can actually download yesterday's and today's, so all of the things that are reported in the bulletin that everyone in the building there at the SBC 23 you can actually get that and look over that and have that record. Well, that's kind of where we were as they wrapped up today. They have one more session tonight. There are several significant things that will be happening tonight. Let me highlight that for you real fast as we kind of try to wrap up here. There will be the issue with our seminary reports from all the presidents. Obviously, it will be of interest when David Dockery comes for Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, all the things that have come out about that. $1.5 million being spent on the president's home and a bunch of other expenditures that seem exorbitant. There are a number of things that have been moved to previously scheduled business that we're going to want to be in touch with. The resolutions report will wrap that up, and there may be several controversial things in the midst of that. And then basically after that, it's the election of the convention preacher, alternate preacher, that kind of thing, the music director, and then the presentation of the officers before the closing prayer. So that kind of wraps it up. Also, I would note for you that we are going to be doing a couple of debrief sessions on the 20th at 1 p.m. Eastern time. John Whitehead is going to walk through with us some of the legal issues that we've seen at SBC 23. So by looking at the legal issues, there are a number of things that have been looked at constitutionally, a number of things that we've talked about in the business and financial plan, other things. So we're going to walk through that and see where our liabilities are, some of those kind of things, and get his observations on the convention. He has been in the convention hall and has actually been a part of some of the motions and amendments. And then a couple of hours later, we'll do a SBC roundtable debrief with some of the leaders that were there in the convention hall. That'll be at 3 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time, and I hope you'll join us for that as well. So that kind of wraps it up for us today. We will do some other updates as they happen, as necessary. So we appreciate you joining and being a part of today's broadcast. We'll have other updates as those come available for us.